Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining
Morning.
us today. I'm Angela with KidCheck, and with me I have Jason Hensley, and we are so excited today. We're going to be talking about ways you can improve child safety in children's ministry, or if you're not with ministry and you're with a educational institution or something along those lines, we'll have lots of great suggestions and tips and tricks for you as well. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about Jason. He has been such a great friend to KidCheck. And one of the things that we have always appreciated so much about him is his willingness to share his knowledge. Jason has a really unique background in that he worked as a pastor for many years before becoming a law enforcement officer. And once he became a law enforcement officer, his sort of 20-year career history has extended. He's been a SWAT team operator. He's been a director of security over a group of charter schools. He's been with colleges and universities. He just has a vast background in safety and security and law enforcement, coupled with the fact that he was a pastor, always brings such a unique perspective. And I might add, he is the second half of what I think is children's ministry, one of their most dynamic duos, which is Heidi Hensley. He is her husband. So Jason, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today, and once again, sharing all of your great knowledge. We so appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So you are at a new church now and you're doing something different. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so about 4 months ago, we moved actually about a year ago, we moved to San Diego. And Heidi took the position of children's director here at Shadow Mountain Community Church. And then about 4 months ago, I came on staff as director of safety. We have not only a church, but we have a Christian high school that goes K through 12, and we have a seminary that's on our property as well. So it encompasses all of that.
That's great. Well, I'm so glad that you're continuing to use your knowledge of law enforcement to work in ministry, because I just think that that's just so great that over the years, you have been so generous with sharing so much. One thing I wanted to share with our viewers is Jason actually wrote a piece for us called Safety Beyond Checkin. And he did this, I think, back in 2016. And still today, it is one of our most read blog posts that we have on the site at all. So it's still so relevant, and everything that you shared was so right on. So, we just appreciate that knowledge that you're so willing to share with us. And so let's go ahead and get started. And I want to talk about, in today's environment and all that you've seen and all that you've done, what do you feel are the top three sort of risks and liabilities to children's ministry or youth or in that area?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different directions that we could go. I definitely think in today's climate and what we're dealing with in society, not having a safety plan. And there are so many different things that come into play, sizes of church, budget. But today there are so many different resources that are available that can support a church of any size with any budget to be able to implement. I think the problem is just putting your head in the sand and saying, well, it will never happen to us. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of churches and schools today in the United States that said that it will never happen, and it happened. And so developing a safety plan and begin to be proactive to that. If you don't have a safety plan, get to work and get a safety plan. That would for sure be my first thing that I would want to point out.
And when you say creating a safety plan, are you talking about like a children's ministry director working on a safety plan for their area? And if so, who should they work with on that?
Well, obviously, it's an interesting dynamic for us here personally, because where our church has the benefits of having someone that's in a full-time capacity, right? To like what I do. But prior to that, even Heidi, over the years at different locations that we were at, Heidi was the one who took that and ran with it. Some of the policies that I even use today that I've implemented since I've been here is stuff that Heidi had developed years ago as a children's pastor, a children's director. So, it really depends on the size of the church and the resources that are available. If there isn't somebody that has the skill set or knowledge, I think it's important for a member of staff, if it's a children's director or a children's pastor or a youth pastor or somebody that takes the initiative to pour in, because it takes time and effort.
Yes.
It's not just something that poof, there's a safety plan.
Yeah, it's true.
It's going to take getting some elbow grease into it and get to work and developing a safety plan that's going to fit your church and how that works around your church. So
that's great. Okay. And so what is your next risk or liability that you're thinking about?
I think the next one is after you have a safety plan in place. What good is having a safety plan in place if your staff and your volunteers are not familiar with it? So training, law enforcement background. And, we drilled certain things when I was on a tactical team until it just became second nature. Well, it is a little bit different, obviously, in a church environment when we're dealing with volunteers.
Right.
But it is important that those volunteers and your staff are familiar with your safety plan. One of the things that we're working on here is trying to generate like a reminder that we send out, whether it's a email or even a video that just brings up one of our pieces of our safety plan that we will send out to our volunteers and to our staff that just kind of reminds them a little piece every month, because it's a perishable skill, just like anything else. If you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Right.
So it's important to just continue to do small little trainings. Heidi does a quarterly training with her staff in children's ministry, but she also will send out different things in children's ministry. And on my side, when it comes to just the basic general safety plan, that's the direction that we're heading, is to be able to send out monthly reminders.
That's awesome. And one thing I have to share is that I always quote Heidi. Even still today, she, a few years back, shared with our community that each week she highlighted a different safety policy, and she called it a standing meeting. And she said it never took more than 10 minutes, but every week she highlighted a new policy. And that was how, in addition to the quarterly trainings, she kept people, involved and continuing to learn and ask questions. And I quote her all the time still today on that, because I think that is brilliant, because it's so hard for anybody to, carve out 2 or 3 hours a couple times a year to go through a big safety training. And do they really retain it? It's probably not very often. So I love those little chunks.
They're picking up only a small percentage when you do that annual training. And yes. I experienced that in law enforcement, where you would go and do something where it was once every 2 years kind of thing. First aid CPR is a perfect example. You go and do that once every 2 years, right? And a lot of that, if you're not using it, you're going to lose it. And so Heidi is, and the other neat thing, since her ministry has expanded and she has, I think 10 on her team now that are in leadership, she equips her leaders to do that with their volunteers as well. So it is kind of that now trickle effect to support the volunteers.
Oh, that's great. And so what's your final thoughts on the top risks and liabilities?
Well, I am talking to KidCheck. So I would tend to say that it is really important to have a form, and in all seriousness, to have a check-in system. And it's not only to have a check-in system and the technology that you guys have that has how it's come so far in such a short period of time, the ability to be able to have access to all of your kiddos I've got my phone right here. You could have access to your kiddos right here. And be able to communicate with your parents. That's key. And it's not only having that system, but it's having the ability for your staff and your volunteers to know how to use the system.
Yes. I
think that's extremely important as well. I mean, you could have the best program in the world, but if you know how to use it, it's a waste of money and time. So,
and we run into that all the time, and it's like we always share with people, we would love it if they would use KidCheck, but in all reality, if that's not possible for them, or they already have another system in place, that's great too. As long as they have something where volunteers and staff and leadership are aware of who should be retrieving and not retrieving those kids. I mean, it's just so important. So I sincerely appreciate the plug for Kid Check always, but know that we always share with people, whether or not you use us, we just want you to have something that you can identify, those kids with. And it's a big deal. And the technology on Checkin has really, like you said, it has come really far. And it's not just attendance tracking anymore. It's about arming people with information from a mobile perspective that they can use to help everyone work together, not just, in children's ministry or youth ministry, but safety teams and, just, it really has. I mean, I sometimes my head just spins and how far the technology's come, but yeah, that's great. Well, and thank you.
It's also secondary notification in event of an emergency. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an active shooter or an active threat situation. It could be any number of things that you're able to mass communicate to all of your families quickly. So yes. I think that's another awesome piece to having a program like this.
Yeah, that bi-directional communication is huge. And I think it also gives parents peace of mind to know that if something does occur in an unfortunate situation, that they will be prompted on what's happening with their kids. They'll be kept in the loop. They'll be given direction as to where their kids are going. So that is really important. And so thank you for sharing those risks and liabilities. But if there was one thing that, no matter the size of the church or where they were located, if there was one thing that a church could implement that you felt could immediately improve child safety, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to cut right to really the issue of what we have been dealing with in the United States over the last couple of years. I would say know your lockdown procedure.
Right? Interesting.
I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I mean, that is what, if we're talking about, I'm a parent. I've got a 21-year-old. Heidi and I have a 21 and a 16-year-old. But Joan is a 16 and he's in our student ministry. I want to know that while I'm handling stuff, that there is something that's taking place in where he's at in our student ministry area, that they know the steps in order to go into a full lockdown and to protect my kids. And as parents, we want to know that. As a society, when we attend church, we want to be able to go and to worship God and not to be thinking about that, knowing that these things are in place. And so I would say that whoever it is that, the audience is probably a lot of children's pastors, student pastors, know your policy and have that ready to go, that in the event that you need to go into a lockdown, you are prepared to go into a lockdown. Having your staff, having your volunteers prepared to push forward and to being able to secure the space that you're in.
That's great. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because there's a lot of current conversation around lockdown procedures. So for you in such a large church, do you train all of your staff and leadership on the lockdown procedures? Is there anyone who takes point on that while you're dealing with other things? How do those lockdown procedures get passed down?
So we have two, I call them barriers. And a lot of the larger churches are able to do that. And I try to simplify certain things depending on the size of the church. We have uniformed personnel. We have California Highway Patrol that does our traffic, and they're also in and around our campus as well. We have uniformed security on our staff, and then we have plain clothes as well. So I call it that we kind of have different barriers.
Yeah.
A lot of churches aren't able to be able to do it to that degree, and I think that we can get into that piece too to simplify that. But I think that it's important to have these different barriers in place to be able to, in the event that I'm indisposed or unavailable.
Yeah,
we have so many guys in our on our team that know that, hey, being a police officer, you have that's just kind of built in, that if this guy isn't calling it. This guy's going to call it, and this guy's going to call it. And that's really kind of the development that we have. We are tightening certain pieces of our communication. So our plainclothes guys to be able to communicate with our uniformed guys and, that kind of thing. But, there's always room for improvement. And I think the minute that a church gets to a place where they think, we're good to go. We've addressed all this kind of stuff. That's where it can get dangerous. And it doesn't matter what size of church it is. So I think that you always have to sit back. And the other thing too, that I think is important is always get a fresh set of eyes.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Even after, I've been here for 4 months, probably in the next couple of months, I'm going to try to bring a friend or two in. There's an organization, Strategos International, Guy Beveridge has become a friend of mine. I would love to be able to bring someone like him in that, come in and does another threat assessment after we've been able to accomplish certain things, to bring somebody else in and come in and do another threat assessment to just help process things through. I love walking in with different guys into our sanctuary, our worship center, and say, all right, let's just brainstorm this space.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have that.
And so what I hear you saying is that for lockdown procedures, they do evolve. So you don't just design them once. They're constantly evolving. So you're constantly looking at different areas of threat and really evolving those procedures. No matter what size church you are, whether you're little or you're real big, they're always evolving. That's fascinating. That's good stuff.
I'm calling our safety plan 1.0 that we're rolling out right now.
Oh, interesting.
Because to me, you always need to chase best practice. If you're not chasing best practice, then you're going to get left behind. And to me, law enforcement, California, I was a California police officer. I want our best practice to be able to mirror when El Cajon Police Department comes in an emergency, or El Cajon Fire or the sheriff's office comes in. I want us to be able to have best practice in place so that we're able to immediately support them. And that's also even the terminology that we have within our safety plan. I want it to be able to mirror the same terminology that our local agencies are going to use.
Interesting. That's a really good point. We always share with people that knowing your local resources and giving them the opportunity to train in your facility is so valuable. Much like you're saying, bringing people in and talking about brainstorming in certain areas, it's just so important. And so all of this sort of safety stuff can be so intimidating for somebody who is a children's pastor who really they haven't been in law enforcement and they haven't. How would you recommend to people that, that are trying to integrate with their security teams? How do they do that? What suggestions do you have for children's pastors or ministry directors that have said, I don't even know who my security team is, let alone work with them on stuff? So what are your thoughts around that, like integrating?
Other than the safety director and the children's director being married to one another. Yeah, I can see the dynamic.
Other than that, you don't get that very often. That's funny.
I think
the community, you're not abdicating marriage. You're just saying
correct,
this is how you integrate with them. Okay.
Yes, ours just happens to be that way. No, I think it's important because, a stat that I read the other day, and I don't know how accurate it is or how new it is, but 97% of churches today are congregations under 100.
Interesting.
So you think about that across the board, across the United States, how many of them are going to have even a retired or current police officer? Might not be the case. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be a retired police officer, but someone who is security minded. Churches might not have that. And so I do understand that it can be a bit overwhelming for a church, whether it's a pastor that has a volunteer children's director, pastor, to be able to implement and to be able to process things. I want to encourage that there are just so many resources out there. And we're going to get into one of them hopefully here in a little bit.
Right.
But there are so many things that are out there that are accessible for them to be able to get a hold of that can begin the process. Like I shared in the article, and you and I have talked about it in the past, I think it's important to reach out to your local first responders in your emergency plan. We just recently took our emergency plan that we're developing, that we're getting ready to put out, and I ran it over with our local agency. We had 10 officers that was doing a threat assessment that on our campus about a month and a half ago. And I sat down with a tactical lieutenant and said, here's what we're doing. And he gave me some small things. I think it's important to collaborate with your police department and your fire department in the event of emergency. And that also jumps over into the medical piece too, because you will have your fire and your ambulance and response and how that's going to happen on your campus. And it's important to have those conversations.
So what I hear you saying is a good step to take is if you're in a church that doesn't have any active law enforcement or past law enforcement, a children's ministry director can still work with the local resources. They can still figure out the strategy and the plan and sort of the tactical details. Even if they don't have a security team on site, they can work with the local resources.
Yes.
That's a great tip.
I think if you go and you begin to develop a safety plan, I mean, you could contact your local agency and say, do you have a resource? Some may have it, but you also don't want to burden the local law enforcement or the local fire department to provide your safety plan, because that's not what they're in the business of doing. So if you have it and then you're able to take this safety plan to a contact that you have within your local agency and say, hey, this is the direction we're wanting to go. Does this line up with, does it agree? I think is a great step.
Oh, that's awesome. And one other thing I will mention too is on the KidCheck blog, if you're interested in seeing examples of safety plans, we have a ton of information out there for people who are just starting out. And there are some outlines and some different pieces that will help get that process started. That's maybe just a jumping off point for people. So if you're watching this and you're wondering, well, where do I even start to see what's included in a safety plan? You can check out the KidCheck blog and there's a ton of information out there for you. So a couple of things that we have talked about is some small things that organizations can do that don't cost very much money that can help with safety. I know you have brought up a really cool little piece of equipment called a lock block. Can you talk a little bit more about that and share some of those not so expensive safety pieces that people could use?
Yes, it's interesting. Obviously, when you go into a lockdown situation, you want to be able to get into that lockdown as quick as possible. Depending on the doors and whether your building is strictly, a lot of your doors are interior or exterior. So the structure of your property or your campus, there are all kinds of different resources. We have a lot of doors on our campus that open out. And so there is this, I think it's a $8 or $9 solution that we use here. When I was a police officer in the Central Valley, we installed thousands of these. They're called lock blocks. And it's a little piece of rubber that just slides over. It allows the door from securing all the way. And if you need to go into a lockdown situation, you just pull that little piece of rubber back, pull the door closed, and now that door is secure. So you just keep the door locked, but with this little rubber thing, it keeps the lock from engaging closed. And so there's just so many different resources that are out there depending on your doors, what you're needing to accomplish. But I think there's a couple of the other things too, is it keeps a teacher or a volunteer from having to step out in the hallway. If there's an immediate threat in that hallway, all you're doing is pulling that rubber back and pulling the door. Now that bad guy is going to have to breach that door, then just make entry. And
right.
Every time that you can create a barrier, that slows the process down from, mass casualty, to say that, I guess the best way to describe it.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I want to encourage those that are listening to this to get on, and it doesn't take too much time to research all these different possibilities of securing your campus quickly.
And where do you suggest people go? Would it be like an Amazon, or where do they start to do the research? Just like look up, safety apparatus for classrooms, or how would they start that research?
I would tend to think there's probably like under an active shooter, secure such things. There are those a lock block, like what we're talking about, the solution that we've used, and it's BLOK, lock block. um, is a great resource. And I think they have some other resources on their site now too, that is not just that. So if it's a door that's opening in, the different steps
Yes.
that you can take. They actually have some other items now that will slide underneath the door.
Oh, interesting.
The door, and you just kind of turn this knob and it secures it as well. So
Oh, that's
there are plenty of resources out there, and there are more coming out every day. Got people come up with another great idea. Ingenuity is a fantastic thing. It's not my skill set, so I love being able to,
yeah, that's great.
To say the least. So
well, and I will say that I went out on the Lock Block site, and they've got some great videos, and they show exactly how the pieces work and how you install them. I was actually, when I watched the video, I was surprised at how easy it was to install it and what it actually did. So there's some great videos out there too that can show people exactly.
Pull that out of the way, close the door, and you're secure.
Yeah.
So
at first you kind of watch it and you're like, can that really be? But it's really easy. So that's great. Well, thank you for sharing those resources. And I always love giving people tips on where they can go and find good stuff. And that's really helpful. So I want to talk about, you are affiliated with the I Love You Guys Foundation. And this is a really interesting foundation. I was out on their website kind of looking at them. And can you tell us a little bit about them and sort of why you chose this foundation and what they do that is so important to the cause of children's safety?
Well, I'll give you how I was exposed to it. When I went to work at a set of charter schools a few years ago, my immediate supervisor's like, hey, I want you to check out the safety plan by I Love You Guys. I'm like, well, number one, I'm not going to use anything that sounds like that. So throwing that out. And then after I got to reading on it, it was one of the shootings that occurred in Colorado. And it was a daughter that texted her parents, I love you guys, right before she was shot and killed. And so the parents and the dad, it became his personal mission to be able to provide free resources to schools in way of what they refer to as a standard response protocol or safety plan. And so after I got to reading it and looking over the material as he dragged me into it, I realized that this is exactly what I've always taught and I felt was a best practice. And so we took that and then morphed it to way how it was going to fit the set of charter schools that I was at. And then after we moved up here, that was for schools. I got a hold of one of the guys that I had communicated with when I was doing the charter school piece. David, I can't think of David's last name, but they're developing a house of worship standard response protocol through I Love You Guys. And so I'm getting to be a contributor to that with them as they develop that. It hasn't gone public yet, but you really can go on the I Love You Guys, which is what we've done here at Shadow, and morphed it already to how it fits for us. Because we have an interesting dynamic because of the church, the Christian school, and the seminary. Right. And so we want to have the same verbiage that is going to support our seminary, which, college age kids or even older, high school, in elementary, and then the church, and how that works on a weekday and on the weekend. And so we're having to kind of work it. But I Love You Guys is a free resource. All you have to do is let them know that you're using their resource, and it's simple. It's one page that you put in the classroom, and a lot of times organizations, and it's kind of been what we have done over the years, is we have this binder that hangs on the wall with like 20 tabs on it. In an exigent or an emergency situation, you're not going to go running over there looking through tabs. If you have time, you're able to process that. And we expand our safety plan in a much larger document. But in an emergency situation, you're not going to go running to a wall to look through these tabs. And so what I Love You Guys has developed is the 4 steps of lockout, lockdown, evacuate, and shelter. And then it kind of gives you 3 or 4 things of what a student needs to do, and then what the teacher or the staff member needs to do. And it just kind of cues you. And so it really goes back to like what we were talking about as far as that training piece is concerned, what we're going to be doing is we'll take one of those 4 areas every few months and just kind of remind everybody, hey guys, this is what a lockout is. This is what a lockdown is. And a lockout to a lockdown, the difference is if there's a threat down the street, there's not an immediate threat to your campus. You're going to secure your exterior, but everything inside the building continues as teachers are still teaching. If you're in a lockdown situation, then we're making that room appear to be empty. The teacher's no longer teaching. We're finding what I call the hard corners, the spots where you can hide where a bad guy's not going to be able to see you. And so that's kind of that difference between a lockdown and a lockout. We call it a secure campus and a lockdown where we're at here. So it is just kind of that terminology difference.
Right.
And then evacuate and shelter. Shelter is like if you have that natural disaster, and then the evacuation, there's any number of things why we're going to evacuate: fire or police activity, that kind of stuff. So.
Right.
But anyways, I love you guys. It's a great organization. They're passionate about protection of kids, but people, because they've just came out with a business program as well as a community college program.
Oh, that's great. And that's free. That's a free resource, correct? So it's on their website?
It's on their website. All you have to do is let them know, and they have a little MOU that you would sign and send back, and that's it. And it is such a simple process. Like I said, I mean, I'm sure that you can make the resource available, but that's our safety plan. And ours is getting changed a little bit because I just downloaded this directly off of their page or off their website yesterday. But so ours is going to have a little bit of different terminology just to fit to where it supports what our law enforcement refers to things as being. But it's a fantastic resource. It's free. And
and one of the things I loved about the foundation website was they've got all kinds of video in terms of presentations that they've given around the country. And it's really good stuff. I mean, it's really fascinating. And so I always love it when those types of organizations are, expanding and growing. And the fact that they are readily providing information that's free is also just a wonderful service. So That's great. Thank you for sharing about that. I love the name. I Love You Guys Foundation, because it always cracks me up to see these big burly, law enforcement guys saying the I Love You Guys Foundation. It's really funny. So, well, Jason, thank you once again. You are always just such a great resource for the KidCheck community, and we appreciate you sharing all of your tips and tricks and knowledge constantly. And it's good to see you too. I know it's been a couple of years since we've seen your smiling face, so it's great to see you. And I think just in wrapping up, I just want to remind people that at KidCheck, we go above and beyond to try to provide organizations that are focused on children as much free information as we possibly can. And you can check us out on the KidCheck blog. There's, I think, over 200 posts out there, many of which have to do with improving child safety. You can also join our growing social community where we share out a lot of different ideas. We get a lot of feedback from people about what they're doing. And so either two of those resources would be great. And then, Jason, how can anybody, if they have a question for you, is there a way that they can sort of reach out to you? Are you on social media at all?
They can email me. It's jason.hensley@shadowmountain.org. I have no problem sharing the resources that I have. I mean, if it's going to help a church to be secure, I'm there to assist and to provide, anything that could be a benefit to them. So just give me an email. That'd be the best thing to do. And Heidi obviously has a lot of different resources that she has available as well for those children pastors, children directors that are out there. And hers is the same thing, heidi.hensley@shadowmountain.org.
Excellent.
And, hey, I have one favor for you, though. As soon as you get off the phone, to go punch Matt Henman in the shoulder for me real hard.
Well, Matt Henman is now in Dallas.
Oh, excellent. He's in God's country.
Yes. Well, okay. I will send him a punch over an instant message for you. Just for you. I will do that for him. So.
That's excellent.
Jason, thank you so much once again. Please say hello to Heidi for us. And we're so grateful for you guys. And I still believe today that you are ministry's most dynamic duo. That's all I want to throw out there.
We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you again.
All right. God bless.
Take care. Thank you, Jason.